Hi, Marissa. We're so excited to have you on today's episode. So, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to jump right into the first question that we have for you today. So, Marissa, I'd love to know how your post secondary journey has led you to where you are today.
Sure. So when I went to university, I was 16. I was kind of pushed into it, I think, pretty fast by my parents. I think not being prepared for it meant I was getting pretty terrible grades for the first time in my life. I felt like because of my bad grades, the kind of conventional path was cut off from me. And that really pushed me to explore more. So even though I was in engineering, I looked at business, I looked at marketing, I went to random anthropology lectures the school had, just like whatever opportunities there were. And I think I just understood and learned a little bit more about myself that way. And at the time, I was really ashamed. I felt like I was like reacting instead of actually being adaptive, which I think looking back on it, that's what I would say. But I think in retrospect, like talking to some of the people who had been more academically successful in university, I realize now that I think I got something, that I wouldn't have necessarily from classroom. And that's really shaped further steps in my career.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that you were really curious to learn and it sort of led you in the direction, regardless of whether it was the one that you were initially planning, but it was the one where you were meant to be headed in. So that's awesome to hear. And for the next few questions, I'd love to pass it off to my co host, Cece, to ask them.
Thank you, Sophie. Marissa, can you kindly provide some insights into the aspects that you find most fulfilling and challenging in your current role within the public health industry, particularly in project planning, hiring, managing, and international travel?
So I just want to clarify my particular little niche is public health in international development, which can be a little bit different from public health domestically. I think my favorite thing is that because public health and international development, I think there are a lot of questions about how to do the right thing. I think everyone comes into it wanting to kind of make the world a better place, but there isn't a straightforward answer about how to do that. And so people are always asking, like, is this the right thing to do? Are we doing the right thing? Is this the right way that we're going about it? And I really like working with people who are so thoughtful, about that part of their job and their mission. And then I think the flip side of that and the challenging part of that is that, especially in international development, so working in lower middle income countries, understanding the impact that your program makes is very difficult because data is really hard to get. And there just isn't really that culture around, like, we understand not just the immediate impact we're having, but the knock-on effects. Like we might negotiate the price of a drug and get it down low with one company, but then we might inadvertently create a supplier monopoly as we do that, right? So there's this like big complicated picture, and I think that's the hardest part about what I do, and probably the biggest challenge that I would say public health, international development is facing at the moment.
Thank you so much for sharing. And the next question, as a manager responsible for hiring and building a team for your projects, what qualities and experiences do you look for in potential candidates?
Yeah, so I had a thought about this question, and I want to kind of flip it for a second and talk about what I don't look for. And I think this is going to be relevant to people, thinking about their careers, and I'll tie it back. But yeah, I just wanted to give an example of when I was working in Sierra Leone in West Africa. I was running a family planning program and hiring a team. And because I was new to public health, I sought advice, from others in terms of what I should be looking for. And I got a lot of advice that I should be looking for women on the team. Obviously, that's illegal, but I think you can understand why someone might feel like that makes quote unquote common sense. Family planning is really personal, it's really intimate. You might think that like a woman might understand that better, And at the end of the day, I ended up hiring a man. I felt like I found the person who just had the right skills for the job, regardless of gender. And I'm really proud of that decision, because I think because he had the right skills for the job, he did a really great job, but he also didn't rely on, because I have X superficial qualification, I automatically assume I know what's right. Like he relied on data and he relied on evidence. And just to be clear, like I think anyone could have done that, like any gender identity, going into that role. But I think it was a really important piece of evidence that like there are these things that people feel are obvious that are critical to success, which I think are really important. Just to give you like a couple more examples, like in startups, when I was working on my own startup, I realized a lot of investors love to see Google on your resume or Facebook or big companies, but working for a big company doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be happy working in like a small, scrappy startup environment, you know? Or in public health, like people often look for degrees, for example, in the disease area you're working in. But just because you have a degree in like the pathology of HIV doesn't mean you're going to do a good job in implementing a program in HIV. So I think it's really important when hiring to just look beyond the superficial keywords that sound like they would be related and really think about like, what does it actually take to do this job well? And for like a public health program, it might actually be less about the health and more about business and administration, which I think is something people often don't really think about. So just to connect that to job seekers, I think not everyone is open to this. You kind of have to find hiring managers that are open to it. But yeah, I would never discourage someone from like, oh, it's a public health job, but you don't have a public health degree, so don't apply. I think these chances are always worth taking as long as you feel like you have those core skills.
I definitely agree with looking beyond the superficial components. That sounds like it connects to the job, but in reality, it's the skill sets. With your expertise in the field, what emerging trends or technologies do you believe will have a significant impact on the public health sector in the near future?
Sure. So I think the big one top of mind is AI, right? That's kind of what's in everyone's minds. And I don't know if you guys have seen in the news of the strikes in Hollywood, the writer strikes and the actor strikes. And I think you can see from early indications like that AI isn't going to be able to replace anyone's job anytime soon. And it's not going to be able to come in and solve our problems for us. Even if it were technically capable, I think from like an infrastructure perspective, it's just going to take time to figure out how that is going to work. But I think what's already happening really quickly is that it's helping people code faster and develop faster and brainstorm faster. And I think that's an area where, especially in public health, public health, I think, has more people problems than technical problems, and I think a tool like AI, if you kind of speed up the front work, which is the technical work often, you can kind of free up time and mental space for people to focus on the people problems. And I think that's going to have a really big impact in the near term.
I agree. And the last question, I'll just pass it back to Sophie.
Thank you, Cece, and thank you, Marissa, for that really awesome insight. I really appreciated it. And our last question for you today. So, as you reflect on your experiences in both corporate and entrepreneurial settings, I'd love to know what key takeaways you have for young professionals seeking to make a difference in the health sector.
I think as a young professional, it's easy to feel like I don't have as much experience as everyone else at the table. And you might also just not have as many degrees as everyone else on the table. And there's so many ways, I think, in which you maybe feel like the underdog. But my favorite person in any given meeting is always the one who asks really basic questions like, why are we here again? And like, what are we trying to accomplish? And why can't we do that? Or why has that always been that way? And all you need for that is ask with humility and an open mind. But, just think logically. You don't actually need deep experience in that field or a degree or whatever to kind of use those questions to focus the team. And I think that can be a really powerful thing and something that you can start doing right away. Even if you don't think you can have input in terms of adding your opinion or like specific content, questions can be really powerful.
Definitely. I agree that that's such an important message to encourage to young people to keep asking questions. And then also in the professional setting that I feel like it's not typically encouraged to do so. even at the most basic level, but it is very important. So thank you for sharing that. And I definitely agree there. So that was the last podcast question that we have for you today, Marissa. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated all of your insight, and I'm sure that our listeners will as well.
Thanks for having me.